What's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is EB, back with another one of these little shots that I'm calling philosophical espresso shots. I think I'm going to start introducing some longer series of videos. If there are any broader topics you'd like to hear some riff on, please let me know. I'm going to come out with some stuff on Eastern versus Western ways of thinking, civilization redesign, altered states of consciousness, some longer multi-part series, but I think there's something to these little philosophical espresso shots that I really want to dig into. I had something coming up in a conversation with a friend the other day that actually, upon reflecting on it, I realized was one of the most powerful shifts or ideas that has played its way out in my life recently, and this is the distinction between content and structure. Another way this is presented a lot is called meta, or going meta, but I think a lot of us get caught up on that term. It has some ambiguity around it. No one has a really good definition. I think presenting it as content versus structure is a much more approachable way to do it, and it still provides the extremely powerful shift in perspective and the way you approach life in this. So I want to riff on this a little bit. So let's get started.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So let's draw an analogy really quick to draw a distinction between content and structure with something like professional sports. Think hockey or soccer, or like a multi-team, one-on-one, team versus team sport where you're on a defined playing field, right? So you're in the hockey rink, you're on the soccer pitch, something like that. The content of the game, you can imagine it being like a first person perspective, right? I'm a player and I have my viewpoint. I can run around, I can interact with the ball, right? Go for goals, play with the team, whatever, but I only ever get it from my first person perspective on the field. The structure, you could imagine being a fan or a spectator in the audience, being able to see the whole field from above or from afar, so that you can actually see how the game itself is unfolding in the space that it's within. This is the structure. This is actually what sport does, right? It defines a clear structure so that the content of the game can be played within it, right? That's why there are rules. That's why there's a defined pitch or a defined field. That's why, there are delineations of the teams so that you can actually play the game within it. This is a really nice analogy for content versus structure. Another example would be education, right? So if you're in high school, if you're in university, the individual classes you have the content inside of them, right? You're taking history, you're taking mathematics, you're taking law, business, whatever it is. You have the content of your courses. But then you have the overarching structure of the educational system, which is typically a multi-year program, teacher to student lecture-based discussions, assignments, testing. That's the structure of how the content is presented. And the thing is that you can take the content structure dynamic for all of your life. You can apply it to every aspect of your life, your relationships, the way you structure your day, the society that you're involved in, the way you approach life. And what I want to convey is that for most of us, nearly 100% of the time, we're solely focused on the content and rarely ever on the structure. But I would invite you to flip that almost entirely and focus near solely on the structure rather than the content, because the content is actually downstream. It comes as a byproduct of the structure itself, right? School courses, the content in courses only comes about that way because it's living within the structure of the educational system, right? So, and what happens is the more you focus on structure, the better the content tends to become. So actually, you don't lose the content by focusing more on the structure. The content gets more engaging and more rich because you're focusing on the structure primarily. So let's look at the relationship you have with your friends or with your partner, right? It's really easy when you're hanging out with your friends, a group of friends, to just be lost in the conversation, in the content of what is being said by everyone. But you can actually, if you pull that up, and this is what people mean by going meta, right? You get this top-down view. You rise above the scenario to look down on it and watch how it's unfolding. Focusing on that can actually be way more engaging, productive, and novel. You can really go deep with people if you can look at the structure of what's being said rather than just what they're saying. So here's an example. If you're talking with a group of friends and everyone's just pitching in, maybe you're just shooting the shit on some random topics. It's easy to get lost on that. Maybe you're talking a lot, maybe other people, and you're just listening. If you watch the structure of it, you can notice, oh, well, this person talks a lot. They dominate the conversation. Oh, and this person hasn't said anything at all. And actually, you never notice that if you're just watching what's being said, because you have to pay attention moment by moment to what's being said. You're fully engrossed in the content of the experience rather than the structure of the experience. But you can actually become a great facilitator, friend, support if you say, hey, look, I notice you haven't spoken a lot. Is something on your mind? Do you want to share something and you just haven't been given the opportunity? What is this dynamic like for you, right? And then maybe your shy or more timid friend actually is given the space because you notice the structure of the conversation. Another example would be there are natural lulls in conversation and in individual speech, right? Just like that pause there. It's normal to pause as you speak, and it's normal for a conversation to be punctuated with that silence as well. And if you watch for that, you can notice that if the silence goes on for maybe a second or two longer, there's always one person who immediately fills it. And then in noticing that, because you're watching the structure, you can say, look, I notice you're really uncomfortable with silence. Do you feel like you have to be talking all the time? Do you feel like just your presence isn't enough for us? And because you're watching the structure, you get these really good questions where you can dig much deeper with people that you couldn't if you were only watching the content of what they were saying. Because in a scenario like that, when someone is filling silence, the content is often nonsense. They're just talking to speak because they're uncomfortable with the silence. And in digging into that, because you've noticed it, because you're watching the structure, you actually give birth to much more novel and interesting discussion points. So that's a very good example of how watching the structure actually downstreams into much more interesting content. And look at your life, right? So you have the content of your day, you wake up, you go about everything, you're always at the center of your experience. And it's easy to just get lost in that day over day over day and wonder why nothing's changing. Wonder why you feel stagnant, why maybe you're not as happy as you could be, why you're not being fulfilled. But you never stop to look at the structure of what's going on in your life. It's easy to be like, yeah, I just watch Netflix for a few hours, or I'm always out with my friends every Friday and Saturday night, and my whole Sunday is gone because I'm too tired to do anything. It's easy to just notice that because it's the center of your experience. But if you actually step back and, well, what is the structure of my day? How many hours go into productive work? How many hours go into relationships? How many hours go into taking care of myself and my finances and my friends and my family? Once you can see the structure, it's much easier to build the life that you want because you're noticing these Lego blocks of time and activities that you're giving your time and attention to. And you never get that if you're only ever just in your direct experience. So this movement, this shift from watching content to watching structure is massive. It's actually hard to understate just how pivotal a shift this can be. This ability to, even as you're speaking, even as I'm saying this whole thing, I'm watching the structure of, okay, what points are coming out, right? How am I presenting myself? Is this engaging? I caught myself a few seconds ago being like, oh, this might be a little monotonous. So now I'm trying to do more dynamic movements, right? Alter the range of my voice. Watching the structure of things unfold is extremely, extremely powerful. And it's counterintuitive in some ways, because if you're in a conversation with someone, you might think, well, I have to be watching the content. I'm having a conversation. I want to know what they say, and I want to see how it is. But actually, there's a flip that happens where you can comment on the way the conversation is unfolding. Right? Let's try to come up with an example for this. The classic, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm good, I'm fine. You know, how are you? Right? The cliche, just like, yeah, I'm good, whatever. It's easy to just take that at face value, right? That's what the content is. It's face value. And be like, oh, okay, good, I'm glad to hear. But watching the structure, the whole experience of the conversation unfolding, you might say something like, well, you're always fine. That's an answer you give me every single time we speak. Is that true? Are you always fine? Tell me about a time that you were sad, right? And immediately you've broken this frame and you've allowed the room to go deeper with someone. So actually, in watching the structure of their response rather than the content, you've gotten to the core of something and you're able to go much deeper with someone. Or even, how was your weekend, right? And someone will give you just a response. Yeah, it was fine. I went for a walk. I saw some people. Surface value content, right? But if you're watching how they present it, the structure of how it flows, you might notice that they were speaking really quickly. They were anxious as they were describing it. Oh, I felt like you were really anxious in saying that. Does that resonate? Does that land? Can you tell me more about that if it's true? So watching the structure just gives you this opportunity to highlight insights into how things are unfolding, both from your own perspective, in other people's lives, and in the world at large, that helps you become skilled at the art of relationships, at the art of living, at the art of engaging with the world, right? It is a driver of insight, because you're watching these habitual patterns unfold. You're noticing things that don't come when you're only focused on the face level value of the content itself, right? The same thing, we could go back to the education example. It's easy to go through the educational system and be like, yeah, okay, cool, that was fun, that was nice, I like this course more than this course, but we never even ask, like, are lectures the best way for people to learn? Is studying and taking notes from a book while sitting down for several hours really the best way to study? Actually, I would argue the answer to both of those is a no. The educational system as it stands right now is definitely not the best way to do any of that, but yet we all just take it as, oh, well, this is how it is and this is how it goes, to both our individual and our collective detriment. The content structure distinction also just allows this opportunity to look at things like you've never looked at them before, right? And this is where we come back into the concept of going meta, or just looking at things from a step above. An example of this is metacognition. Cognition being thinking, meta being thinking about, so thinking about thinking. This is a great way to drive insight into yourself and your psyche and how you operate in the world. It's not just, okay, what am I thinking? What thoughts am I having right now? It's actually, do I think about this properly? Are there different ways I could approach this? Are there different frames I could be looking at this from? And if I can approach the same content from different vantage points, I can actually get a much more cohesive picture of the whole thing and drive new insight and drive better action and just drive a sense of confidence, because I feel like I'm really grasping something. I feel like I'm really seeing it for the full picture that it is. Can also have something like meta feeling, right? It's easy to say, oh, I feel really good today. Okay, that's great. How do you feel about the fact that you're feeling good? That drives a really interesting chain of questions, because it's like, well, actually, I feel even better about the fact that I feel good because I rarely take the time to let myself feel good. Or I feel like my own happiness and fulfillment is contingent on me accomplishing things. So the fact that I can be happy without seemingly have accomplished something today actually makes me feel really good, because I deserve to be happy just like everyone else. And that whole chain of insights only came once we were focused on the structure, once we ask the meta question of how am I actually feeling about my feelings. And this is applied to everything, relationships, learning, right? And the more we can shift here, the more we can pull out of the transient content of experience, whether that's just sleep, waking life, learning, talking, laughing, moving, exercising, the more we can pull out of the transient and find the long-standing foundational structure of things, the more you get to tweak with basically like the source code of reality. Reality is very much a structure-based thing. Society is a structure. Culture builds structure in. Your family builds structure. Your relationships, both intimate and friend, builds structure in your life. And so all the content arises through the structure. And so if you really want to make massive change and make it really powerful and really important, you need to be focusing on the structure of these things, how they play out in your life, and tweaking those dials, not just tweaking the dials of the content of experience. I think that is a good place to start. I would love to know what you think about this. If going meta is something you're familiar with, if the content structure distinction is useful, and particularly if you try to apply this to your life. I'd love to hear some stories of, if you went out and you actually were focusing on the structure rather than the content, and what that brought you, what that felt like, if there was a success, if there was a failure. Let me know in the comments below. If you want to hear anything, if there are any topics you want more of, I'd love to riff on those, so let me know. And with all of that said, I will see you here again for the next one. Thank you.